So gaming on the Samsung S95B is pretty good. So there's definitely going to be a lot of talk about what is going to be the best way of playing games and what TV is going to be the best TV for playing those games. And I've got to be honest, this new Samsung QD-OLED TV, oh my word, it is fantastic, and actually is probably going to be the front runner for TV of the year gaming wise. Let's take a closer look. Firstly, what is the Samsung S95B? Well, it's a QD-OLED 4K HDR, all of that stuff TV. It is fantastic. It's a new technology and was pretty unproven, but seems to be passing all of the tests that we need. The only sort of test that hasn't been passed is the longevity, because it's so new. This TV is brighter than other OLEDs. It can produce a wider colour gamut than other OLEDs. So I've got to be honest, this TV is just utterly fantastic. So I currently have the 55-inch S95B, and I've done my first impressions video, and you can go and click on that and watch that as well. And I will be coming up with other videos regarding things like motion and my full review and everything like that. That's to be coming soon. But one of the main reasons people like us buy these really high-end TVs is because we want the best capabilities for gaming. So this is going to be my gaming review. What are the things that we want to have on these TVs that give us that amazing gaming experience? Well, there's actually quite a lot involved. So before we look in a bit more detail at things like the picture quality, let's look a little bit more external. Now, something you need with the current generation of consoles is HDMI 2.1 ports. Now, a HDMI 2.1 port means that your TV can receive a signal from a console that is both 4K and 120 Hz. Now, the Samsung S95B is a 120 Hz capable display, so you would expect it to have those HDMI ports, which it does. Most TVs actually only have two HDMI 2.1 ports, and normally in most cases that will be enough. However, there are some cases in which you might need more. For example, if you have a soundbar connected to your TV via HDMI, that will use up one of those HDMI 2.1 ports, which means you're actually only left with one HDMI 2.1 port to be able to connect anything else. So if you've got a soundbar and a console that needs a HDMI 2.1 port, then fantastic. As soon as you add in something else that might need it, let's say a second console, then suddenly you have an issue. So the S95B has 4 HDMI 2.1 ports, and you probably won't ever use all of them, but the fact that you sort of don't need to worry which port you plug your console into, and it's going to be HDMI 2.1 anyway, that's perfect. And now we need to look a little bit more into detail about some of the compatibility of this TV. Does it have the features that you'd want for the best possible gameplay? So firstly, it pretty much does. Now, something that happens with game consoles is that even when you're playing a game and trying to get 120 Hz out of the picture, there's a good chance that in certain circumstances your console isn't going to be able to produce 120 Hz the entire amount of time. Maybe there's something intense happening and it's using a lot of power and it just can't get all of those frames out. What might start happening then is that the frame rate will drop. And if your TV is stuck refreshing itself exactly 120 times a second, you're going to run into some sync issues, and that will give you things like screen tearing and juddering and stuff like that. And we don't want that when we're playing games because it's distracting, it slows us down, and it makes the game quality worse. So that introduces something called VRR, which the S95B does have, and that means it can actually change the refresh rate of the TV in accordance to what the input is. So if the refresh rate on the console drops down to 95, it means the TV will output at 95, and that will eliminate things like screen tearing and all of that stuff. And there are a few other technologies that sort of work alongside these things to eliminate those issues. One of them is something called FreeSync, and the other one is G-Sync, and luckily the S95B supports both of those. So if your console or your gaming PC or anything is using any of those things, then it's a thumbs up. Now, I did mention PC gaming, and this TV might not necessarily be suited to people who are high-end PC gamers for a couple of reasons. The first reason is you're quite limited in size. Most people who are PC gamers prefer a smaller screen so they can have it close to them on a desk, for example. Now, the smallest TV you can get is the 55-inch. They're actually going to be bringing out a 77-inch, so you're going to have 3 sizes available, but at the moment it's just 55 and 65. Now, a TV does also have a limited feature, which is becoming a bit of a trend this year, and that's something called BFI. Now, this brings in something called response time. Now, what does happen on these OLED TVs is that when you're showing a frame, that frame will stay still for a certain amount of time, very small amount of time, it's milliseconds, but it will stay still, and then it will switch to the next frame. The issue issue that we have is that you can get perceived effect of motion blur. And normally that isn't necessarily a bad thing, and actually in films and TV, that probably is quite a good thing. It just makes it look a little bit smoother and a little bit more realistic. When you're playing a game and there's lots of things moving on the screen, when they're moving and you just can't see any details because it's so blurred when it's moving, that's not necessarily a good thing. So what BFI does is it actually breaks it up by putting in black frames, and that just sharpens it and removes a lot of that blur. Now this TV does have BFI, but it is only at 60 Hz. So if you're running the TV at 120 Hz, you won't be able to also have BFI running, which personally for me isn't an issue. that doesn't bother me at all, but for some people it will be, so you just have to be aware of it. Now I'm going to briefly touch on picture quality. This TV does look amazing. Now automatically when you open up a game, it's not going to match your settings to what you had on other content. It's going to switch it into game mode. Now when I first opened it up, the brightness and the saturation on game mode was very, very intense. It was sort of trying to show the most amount of colours and the brightest image you could possibly get. And as much as that is impressive, because it's an impressive TV, it doesn't necessarily look good. I do advise going in and sort of maybe bringing some of those settings down a bit. And what is nice is that you can go into the settings and customise all of the picture settings so you can get it just the way you like it. And if you like that super ultra vivid look, then that's fine, that's what it comes with out the box, but it is worth probably going in and changing it a little bit. Now when you get your colour settings right, it looks utterly fantastic. This TV has a wider colour gamut than all other OLEDs that have come before it. The peak brightness in HDR and SDR is really, really good, which means if you are playing games, you will get those massive pops of light, which is good. The problem can be is that sometimes the tone mapping isn't necessarily great in gaming, so I do advise going in and tweaking the settings in order to get it right, because you might find yourself in areas where you can't quite see what's going on because there's too much light blooming, so do bear that in mind. Now speaking of settings, a good thing to focus on is the fact that this has a new game menu. So when you hold on the play button on the remote, it's going to bring up Samsung's little game shortcut menu. That's going to give you a few different things in a handy little area that doesn't cover up the entire screen, which means you can keep playing your game or see what's happening whilst you go in and tweak some of the settings. So you can see things like the current frame rate your game is playing at, you can see whether HDR and VRR are on and working, but you can also tweak some basic settings from that menu. Things like the sound output, the ratio of the screen. Now there is a mini-map mode which is meant to zoom in your mini-map that I didn't play a game where I saw that work, so I might have to do a bit of digging to find a game that I can use that with, because it was always greyed out when I tried to use it. You can also use this menu to go into the game settings and then tweak your picture from that shortcut there. And using that shortcut, that is where you get to the settings for things like BFI. So if you want BFI on, you can turn it on, and if you don't really want it on, you can turn it off. And lastly, something that isn't necessarily obviously related to gaming, but I think makes a massive difference, and that is reflections. Now the problem with OLED TVs, and especially in the past, was that reflections are terrible on them. You have this sort of perfect black display and this sort of gloss finish, but when something's happening and there's a light source behind it, or the room is bright, you can sort of see all the details in the room, and when you're playing a game, that can be a massive issue. Now if you're trying to see what's going on the screen and there's just so much stuff else that you can see happening, like your window, lights, lamps and stuff like that, it's going to stop you being able to play games and making the most out of them and getting the most enjoyment from them. Now the S95B does have reflections. It's not the best TV for reflections, but with the extra brightness, this TV actually performs a lot better than some of its rivals when it comes to reflections. I personally saw quite a large difference between this one and the LG C2. I think the reflection handling on this is so much better, and I am a bit of an LG OLED fanboy, so that comes a lot saying that I think this is outperforming that. Now if you're playing in a dark room, that's probably not ever going to be an issue, but it is something that if there are reflections, it really annoys me. So I just wanted to mention it's going to be performing better than some of the competition in that regard. Now, as much as I've gone on for ages about some of these gaming things, there is a ton load more to talk about with this TV. So I am doing other videos about things like motion handling and just like my full sort of summary review. So if you want to see those, subscribe to my channel and click this video here to see my first impressions of the S95B. Thank you very much for watching. Woo!